The rain had begun its soft assault upon the carriage roof long before the horses slowed at the wrought iron gates of Ashborne Hall. But Lady Frances Whitcomb scarcely noticed the weather. Her thoughts were too tightly woven around the fragile dignity she had tried to salvage from her family's collapse. At 22, she carried beauty like a burden she had not asked for, the kind that drew stares but never security. And as she stepped down onto the glistening gravel, she felt the weight of watching eyes from the servants' archway. Their murmurs traveled quicker than the wind. Her father's debts, the auctioned estate, the humiliation of seeking employment in houses where she once would have been welcomed as a guest. Frances lifted her chin, refusing to bow beneath whispers that followed her like shadows. Inside, the grand entrance hall rose around her in solemn elegance. Polished marble, ancestral portraits, and the heavy scent of lavender oil, yet none of it offered comfort. Her escort, a stiff-backed footman, announced her arrival with the precision of a drumbeat before withdrawing, leaving her to absorb the cold vastness alone. It was then she first beheld the Duke of Ashborne. He descended the staircase with measured steps, each one revealing a figure shaped by austere nobility, tall, broad-shouldered, and handsome in a way utterly untouched by softness. At 25, he carried the air of a man already weathered by disappointment, and when his eyes passed over Frances, the brief flicker of appraisal was edged with suspicion rather than curiosity. Frances curtsied, painfully aware that her gown, though carefully mended, betrayed every threadbare truth of her circumstances. "Your Grace," she murmured, her voice steady though her pulse was not. The Duke offered a curt nod, as if politeness were a currency he grudged spending. Before she could rise fully, voices drifted from the landing above, two visiting ladies observing her with thinly veiled disdain. "Pretty enough," one remarked, "but one wonders what becomes of family when the daughter must seek work in another's home." The comment, intended to wound, hovered in the air like frost. The Duke did not rebuke it. Frances felt the omission more sharply than the insult itself. A maid led her to the drawing room, where applicants for lesser positions waited. Frances took her seat among them, though the contrast between her upbringing and her present company pressed painfully upon her. She listened as they speculated about the Duke's temper, his exacting standards, and his recent broken engagement, whispers of betrayal that had soured his disposition. Frances kept silent, yet every detail carved deeper understanding. Here was a man who guarded his heart with iron, who would rather dismiss than risk disappointment. When the noon bell sounded, she was summoned to dinner, a formality meant to observe her manners under scrutiny. The long table glittered beneath candlelight, reflecting every polished surface and scrutinizing eye. Frances took her place at the far end, uncertain whether the invitation was courtesy or test. Conversation clattered around her. Estate improvements, parliamentary gossip, whether suitable for hunting, but each topic skirted her as if she were an object rather than a participant. Lady Penhust, dressed in silk the color of crushed wine, leaned slightly toward her neighbor and spoke just loudly enough for Frances to hear. "Employment may be charitable, but proximity is unwise. A young woman of her appearance attracts the wrong sort of talk." The Duke's gaze lifted at those words, resting momentarily on Frances. His expression did not shift, yet she sensed a judgment forming, one she could neither contest nor fully perceive. Frances endured the meal with impeccable posture, placing dignity where comfort failed her. When the final course ended, she excused herself with quiet grace, needing the refuge of solitude more than she needed breath. But as she moved through the corridor, she heard steps behind her, the Duke following with the calm inevitability of a closing door. He halted her near a tall window where rain streaked silver lines across the glass. "Lady Frances," he began, his tone controlled but not unkind, "your references are adequate, and your bearing is commendable. Yet I must speak plainly." He paused, and in that moment the manner seemed to hold its breath. "You are not suitable as my wife. Leave before dawn." The words struck with unexpected force. Frances stared at him, disoriented. "Your Grace, I did not presume." It matters little what was presumed, he interrupted. A household such as this cannot risk misinterpretation or unnecessary scandal. His gaze, though steady, held something like restraint sharpened into severity. You will be compensated for your trouble. The carriage will be prepared. With that, he turned away, leaving her suspended between disbelief and humiliation. She had come seeking work, not a proposal, yet he had dismissed her as though she were some scheming intruder. Alone again, Frances pressed a hand to her trembling ribs, forcing breath into her lungs. Pride urged her not to cry, not even in the privacy of her small assigned chamber. She gathered what little she possessed into her warm valise, each folded garment a reminder of how far she had fallen. Outside, the rain deepened into a steady whisper against the windows. Frances sat upon the edge of the narrow bed, hands clasped tightly, trying to steady her thoughts. Dawn would come soon enough, carrying her away from this place of grandeur and coldness. Yet as she blew out the lone candle, she sensed, without reason she could articulate, that the night still held something unfinished, something waiting in the hush between raindrops. The night had scarcely surrendered to dawn when Frances, restless and sleepless, descended the dim corridor with her valise in hand. She intended only to return a borrowed volume before leaving, a simple gesture of respect toward a household that had shown her nothing but cold vigilance. The library door stood slightly ajar, its brass handle glinting under the faint glow of a wall sconce. Inside, shadows clung to tall shelves, and the air held the quiet perfume of aged paper. Frances approached the central table, opened her bag, and withdrew the book with the careful reverence of someone accustomed to preserving what little she possessed. When she noticed the frayed spine, instinct guided her hands. She unwrapped a small roll of linen mending tape she always kept for emergencies and began to restore the delicate binding with patient, practiced movements. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not hear the soft click of the door or the measured footsteps crossing the rug. It was the Duke who spoke first, his voice like a blade she had expected yet still felt unprepared to meet. "You are repairing it?" She rose at once, startled, stammering an apology. But he lifted a hand, more in confusion than accusation. "That was my mother's," he said quietly, as though the sight of it unsettled him. The subdued sorrow in his eyes flickered only for a moment before he reclaimed his habitual composure. "You need not trouble yourself further," he added, though the edge in his tone had softened. Frances offered a simple explanation. The book had been weakened by time, and she wished only to return it in better condition. He studied her with an expression she could not interpret, then turned away abruptly, as if unwilling to acknowledge the feeling her small act stirred within him. Leaving the library, Frances walked toward the servants' wing to express her gratitude before departing. Near the scullery, a young maid knelt beside a shattered porcelain bowl, her shoulders shaking with quiet panic. Frances crouched beside her, whispering reassurance as she helped gather the fragments. "It can be mended," she soothed, "and if not, there is no shame in accidents." The girl confessed that the steward would likely dismiss her. Frances promised to speak on her behalf, even though she had no authority, only compassion. Her words steadied the maid, whose gratitude shone through wet lashes. Unbeknownst to Frances, the Duke stood on the gallery above, compelled by an instinct he would not name. He watched the interaction with growing disquiet, for it contradicted every suspicion he had formed. He told himself he merely observed housekeeping matters, yet he remained until Frances disappeared around the corner, leaving him with a lingering sense of unease he carried like an unwelcome truth. As Frances crossed the courtyard toward the waiting carriage, she heard raised voices near the stable yard. A circle of workers had gathered around the steward, who gripped a trembling stable boy by the arm. The boy, scarcely 14, clutched a pouch of oats, claiming he had only taken what a sick horse required. The steward accused him of theft, preparing to drag him before the Duke. Frances stepped forward without hesitation, placing herself between them, her voice firm despite her trembling hands. She explained the boy's reasoning and confronted the steward's harshness, demanding fairness where there had been none. Her shawl caught on a nail during the commotion, tearing in a jagged line down one side, exposing her to more humiliation than danger. The spectators murmured, unsure whether to side with her courage or fear the consequences. The Duke arrived moments later, drawn by the noise. He assessed the tableau, the frightened boy, the flustered steward, the torn shawl, and Frances standing defiant under the gray sky. Her hair, loosened by the scuffle, framed her face in wind-swept disarray, making her appear both vulnerable and unyieldingly resolute. The Duke demanded an explanation. Frances gave one with measured clarity, neither pleading nor boasting, simply stating what she believed to be just. Her sincerity irritated him as much as it stirred him. He dismissed the crowd, reprimanded the steward, yet offered Frances no word of approval. Instead, he addressed her with a tight formality that revealed more conflict than disdain. "You should not involve yourself in matters beyond your station," he said. She replied softly, "Sometimes the right thing is simply something no one else chooses to do." Her eyes met his for a single breath, and something unspoken flickered between them before he turned away. Rumors sprouted with the speed of wildfire. Servants whispered that the Duke had intervened for Frances alone. Others claimed she had orchestrated the scene to manipulate his sympathy. Lady Penhurst, ever eager to feed scandal, insisted that Frances thrived on attention unsuitable for a woman of her precarious background. By afternoon, the household crackled with gossip, all of it circling around Frances like a tightening net. When Frances returned to her chamber, shaken yet composed, she discovered the mended book had been retrieved and placed upon the small writing desk. She had not left it there. Tucked beneath it lay a single ribbon of pale blue silk, her own, apparently found by someone who chose not to keep it. She touched the ribbon with hesitant fingers, uncertain whether its placement was a gesture of respect or a silent reminder of her impending departure. The ambiguity unsettled her, yet she could not deny the faint, fragile warmth the sight inspired. As she prepared once more to leave, a thought lingered unbidden. Perhaps the Duke was not as unmoved as he wished the world to believe. That single possibility, fragile and uncertain, carried her through the gathering shadows, promising that her story within Ashborne Hall was not yet finished. Night gathered over Ashborne Hall like a velvet curtain, heavy with storm clouds that pressed close to the earth. Thunder rumbled beyond the windows as Frances, resigned to her fate, slipped into the library for a final moment among the shelves she had grown to cherish in her brief, turbulent stay. She intended only to collect the mended book she had left earlier, though she doubted anyone wished her to take it now. The room stood dimly lit by two wavering candles, their flames trembling as though startled by her entrance. She placed her hand upon the restored spine, tracing the stitches she had sewn with steady, careful fingers, and felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving it, and everything else, behind. The door opened with a soft groan, and Frances turned just as the Duke stepped inside. He looked as though the storm outside had settled within him, carried in the taut line of his shoulders and the sternness that for once seemed less like anger and more like conflict. He paused, as if surprised to find her there, though his eyes revealed he had sought her deliberately. "You are still here," he said, not accusingly, but with a restrained tension that suggested he had imagined, perhaps even dreaded, her absence. "I'll leave before dawn," she replied, keeping her voice composed. "I only wish to ensure your mother's book was safely returned." The Duke's gaze drifted to the restored volume, and something softened in the chill blue of his eyes. "You have a skill," he murmured, stepping closer. "Bookbinders are seldom gentle. Yet you repaired it as though it mattered to you." "It mattered to someone," Frances said simply, "and I wish to honor that." Silence seemed to expand between them, shaped not by discomfort, but by the weight of unspoken truths. Outside, rain lashed against the windows in relentless sheets. The Duke's posture shifted, revealing uncertainty beneath his practiced composure. "Earlier today," he began, "you challenged my steward. You intervened for the boy without hesitation. Why would you do that?" The question held more curiosity than reproach, as though her courage perplexed him. "Because fear silences too many," she answered, "and because I've learned what it feels like to have no one speak for me." Her voice nearly faltered, but she steadied it, unwilling to expose more vulnerability than necessary. His expression changed, touched by something akin to remorse. "I reacted harshly when you arrived," he said after a long pause. "Your presence unsettled me. I have had cause to be wary." He hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "I was once engaged to a woman who found my reserve intolerable. She claimed I lacked warmth and abandoned the arrangement with considerable cruelty. Since then, I have judged quickly, perhaps too quickly, in order to avoid being judged myself." Frances felt a pang of sympathy, a quiet, genuine ache she could not disguise. "I am sorry," she said softly. "Betrayal leaves its mark, but need not dictate every decision that follows." The Duke looked at her as though her words disrupted something long calcified within him. "You speak as though you understand," he said, almost challengingly. "I do," she replied. "My father's ruin forced me to watch people vanish from our lives, as if loyalty were a costume they had misplaced. I have been left to carry the shame of choices that were not my own. And yet, I must continue forward, even when the world assumes the worst of me." A flicker of admiration, unmistakable now, glimmered across his features. Frances placed the mended book on the table between them. "Some things," she said, "are not beyond repair." The Duke stepped nearer, halting only a breath away from her. The candlelight cast their shadows into a single silhouette against the wall. For a moment, neither spoke. Frances felt her heartbeat quicken, not from fear, but from the electric awareness that something delicate and dangerous hovered between them. The Duke lifted his hand slightly, as though intending to touch her cheek, then withdrew it abruptly, as if resisting a temptation he believed he had no right to indulge. "You should not remain," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Your departure will spare you further gossip." "My departure," she answered, "has already been commanded." The faintest wince crossed his expression, too swift for pride to conceal. "Frances," he began, her name spoken without title, without distance. She felt the syllables settle into her chest with an unfamiliar warmth. Yet whatever he meant to say dissolved into silence, smothered by restraint. A clap of thunder shook the windows. Frances, unwilling to endure another moment suspended between hope and humiliation, curtsied with quiet dignity. "Good evening, Your Grace." She turned to leave, but her steps slowed when she sensed him reach forward. His hand hovered inches from her arm, then fell to his side. Words failed him, as she did not stay to ease his struggle. She returned to her room, heart pounding as if it fought against the inevitability of dawn. When the hour arrived, she climbed into the waiting carriage, the wheels creaking under dampened straw. The estate slowly receded behind her, its grand silhouette swallowed by the pale, mist-laden light of morning. Yet even as she left it behind, the memory of the Duke's unfinished sentence lingered. An echo that promised their story was far from concluded. Dawn had scarcely touched the fields when the Duke of Ashborne stood in his silent hall, feeling Frances's absence with unsettling clarity. Every room seemed thinner, as though her brief presence had woven a warmth now abruptly withdrawn. He moved through the hall with restless steps, confronted by the knowledge that he had thrust away a woman whose sincerity had unsettled him more deeply than he wished to admit. Seeking distraction, he entered the library, only to find her pale ribbon near the hearth. When he lifted it, recognition struck him with painful precision. He did not want her gone. Pride had claimed to shield him, yet it had driven away the one person whose quiet strength had stirred him in years. Without allowing doubt to argue, he ordered his horse and rode through the gates just as mist drifted across the road like a veil. The cold air cut sharply against his face, but he welcomed its clarity. The carriage bearing Frances had departed shortly before dawn, and he followed the wheel tracks through the soft earth with fierce determination. The countryside blurred into subdued greens and gray sky, yet his thoughts held only her steady gaze, her unwavering defense of the vulnerable, and the calm dignity she had maintained even under cruelty. When he finally caught sight of the carriage, relief swept through him. He urged his horse forward until the startled driver reined in. Francis stepped out slowly, confusion shadowing her features, but beneath it he saw a weary woman struggling to keep her composure. The morning light softened her expression, and for a moment neither moved. The stillness trembled with unspoken emotion. "Your Grace," she said, "why have you come?" He dismounted at once. "Because I was wrong," he said, the confession rising from a depth he had long concealed. "I sent you away from fear of being deceived again, fear of feeling more than I understood. But your absence has shown me a truth I can no longer ignore. I misjudged you, and I regret it with sincerity." Francis met his gaze, though a quiet hurt lingered. "You dismissed me without allowing explanation," she replied. "I cannot return only to ease your conscience." "It is not conscience alone," he answered, stepping closer. "It is admiration, it is respect, and yes, it is longing, the first honest longing I've felt in years." He drew a steady breath. "You defended a child you scarcely knew. You spoke kindly where others were cruel. You acted with integrity, even when doing so invited gossip." His voice faltered, then steadied. "If you refuse me, I will accept it, but allow me the chance to prove myself." She lowered her eyes, torn by the sincerity woven through his tone. "What you ask is not simple. My past has taught me to tread cautiously. And mine," he said quietly, "has taught me that caution without hope becomes a prison. I no longer wish to live behind its walls." When he slowly knelt in the damp grass, Francis drew a startled breath. The gesture stripped him of every defense he had relied upon. "Come back to Ashborne," he said softly, "not as an obligation, but as someone whose presence has already changed me. Let us begin with honesty rather than fear." She studied him, remembering the warmth she had glimpsed beneath his reserve and the sincerity he had revealed despite himself. Slowly, she extended her hand. He rose, holding it gently, waiting for the smallest sign of acceptance. "If we begin anew," Francis said, "there can be no shadows of doubt." "Then they are gone," he answered. "I choose you freely, Francis." Emotion trembled through her voice. "Very well, I will return." Their journey back unfolded in quiet understanding, each glance revealing a steadying trust. At Ashborne Hall, subtle transformations followed. The servants moved with renewed ease, and the Duke, once governed by restraint, began to reveal a gentleness that surprised even him. Frances, in turn, allowed herself to breathe more freely, sensing the sincerity behind his effort. Weeks later, in the library where their understanding began, he asked her to be his wife. She accepted with measured grace, trusting the constancy he had shown. Their wedding was modest yet luminous, its candlelight casting a golden glow upon their joined hands. As Francis stepped beside him, the Duke felt the memory of his own harsh command dissolve into the vow he now spoke with unhesitating reverence. She had been the woman he once deemed unsuitable, yet she had become the heart of the home he thought beyond repair. And as soft bells tolled beyond the manor walls, Ashborne Hall welcomed a new chapter shaped not by duty alone, but by a love earned through humility, courage, and the willingness to begin again. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.